It's been 2,000 years since the glorious light of the cross illuminated a world veiled in darkness and confusion about the character of God. And still today, the greatest need of mankind is a revelation of God's love as revealed in the life of Christ. Amazing Facts presents the Everlasting Gospel with Pastor Doug Batchelor. Coming to you each week from Sacramento Central Church in sunny California. Discover hidden treasures in God's Word today.
Happy Lord's Day. Good to see each of you. I want to welcome any visitors, welcome our friends who may be listening or watching. I'm excited about today's message, and I want to get right into it. I want to talk to you about the providence of God and dealing with the subject of, is it God's providence and what are the chances? We are surrounded continually with evidence for God in the things that happen around us providentially. I'd like to begin with a story, true story. On the front porch of this little country store in Illinois, a small businessman stood with his partner. Business was drying up, and the partner asked, "How much longer can we keep this going?" The tall owner answered, "It looks as if our business is just about winked out." He continued, "You know, I wouldn't mind so much if I could do what I really want to do. I want to study law. I wouldn't mind so much if we could just sell everything we've got, pay our bills, and I'd have enough left over to buy one book. That one book would be Blackstone's commentary on English law, but it's not looking too likely right now." At that moment, while they were talking, a strange-looking wagon came up the road. The driver drove it up close to the porch of the country store, and then looked at the owner and said, "I'm trying to move my family out west, and I'm out of money." Family was obviously impoverished. He said, "I've got a good oak barrel here that I could sell for 50 cents. The store owner looked along the wagon. He came to the wife, and he saw the children looking at him pleadingly. Probably hadn't eaten in a while. Her face was thin and emaciated. He slipped his hand into his pocket, and he took out, according to him, the last 50 cents he had. And he said to the man, "Well, I reckon I could use a good barrel." All day long, the barrel sat on the porch of the store. The partner kept chiding his fellow owner about it. Later in the evening, the tall businessman walked out. For the first time, he decided to clean out the barrel so they could use it. When he looked inside, he saw some papers in the bottom. And as he went down to fish out the papers, he noticed a book. His long arms pulled from the barrel a book, and he looked at it dumbfounded. It was Blackstone's commentary on English law. The businessman was Abraham Lincoln. Now, what do you think? Is that chance or providence? If he had not found that book, probably wouldn't have gone into law and then gone into being the president of our country. We are surrounded by everyday evidence for God in things that happen providentially that to me really prove there is a God. Maybe before I go any farther, I should take a moment and talk about the word providence. We've all used that word before. Providence is really a composite of two words, pro, meaning before, and video, that's where you get providence. Video means to see. You all know what a video is. It means to see something in advance. Providence means it's God's foresight, and because He has that foresight, and He is all-powerful, He can direct events to fulfill His will. Providence means the foreseeing care and guidance of God over His creatures, that God omnisciently directs the universe and His interaction with the affairs of humankind, directing through wise benevolence. It means a manifestation of divine care or direction. You know, for years there was a group of religious people, you don't see many of them anymore, called deists. No one would dare say they were an atheist back in those days because there was so much evidence for God. But a deist said there's obvious evidence for God in creation, but God created things and just sort of left things to operate under natural law. But you look at things long enough and you realize that God is still very involved on a daily basis in human history and our lives individually. You maybe haven't thought about it, or you haven't really recognized it lately. How many times have we seen in the Bible history, or maybe in your own lives, that at a precise moment, the right person was in the right place at the right time for things to happen that never would have happened otherwise? You know the story in the book of Esther. What are the chances that this pretty little Hebrew slave could be chosen among hundreds to be the queen of Persia, and just so happened that she was chosen at that time for that position when there was a conspiracy to exterminate all of the Jewish people in the world, and the king didn't know that he had married a Jew? That's why Mordecai, her uncle, said, Esther 4:14, "For if you altogether hold your peace at this time, then there will enlargement and deliverance arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will be destroyed. And who knows whether or not you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" You are the right person in the right place at the right moment to change history. I think that's probably true of every one of us. Every day God has given us opportunities to make a difference, and you're in that place at that time for that purpose. I've learned slowly over the years that when something goes wrong while I'm traveling, I miss an appointment, I have to spend time in an airport or another day at a hotel, I ask this question: all right, Lord, in your providence now, you've designed that I'm supposed to be here. It's not my plan. I'm assuming it's your plan. And it's almost always true that I'm there for one of two reasons. Matter of fact, everything that happens to you, you can boil down to one of these two reasons. Sometimes both. Those reasons being, God is going to try to teach you something about Him through this experience, or He's going to try to help you reach somebody else through this experience, or both. Usually both. Always ask that. Whatever happens to you, good or bad, Lord, what are you trying to teach me? How am I to grow through this experience? Or how am I to reach someone else through this experience? Psalm 37, verse 23, "The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, and He delights in His way." God will direct your paths. Nothing is happening that He is not aware of. He's working all things together for good. God is still in control. He is sovereign. Things aren't surprising Him in your life or in the history of the world. He's not fretting. We don't need to fret. There is a plan. And if you are cooperating with God, He promises all things will work together for good. God is even good providentially to unbelievers, putting the right person at the right place at the right time. He sends the sunshine on the just and the unjust. One of the reasons that I came to believe in God, from being atheist or something like an atheist, was I saw too many providential things you can't explain. Here's one of thousands I could tell you. And I'm not saying I've experienced thousands because I'm more favored than others. You've experienced thousands too. We just often forget. I'm in New York City, 16 years old, by myself. Brother's living in Florida with my father. Mother's now moved to England. I don't have any friends I can really turn to. I've got one friend in New York City. He's my age. He went to Trinity Catholic school there. His name was David McLean, good friend from India. He and I were on wrestling teams. Matter of fact, if you read my book, David and I ran away together the second time I ran away. He was a good friend. But I didn't know where he lived. I'd never been to his house. We always met at school or in the park. I had no idea where he lived. I'm alone. I have nothing to eat. I have no money. I think I've got some change in my pocket, so I thought, well, maybe I could call him. I go to a phone booth that don't exist anymore in New York City because everyone's got cell phones. And they have a big phone book in every phone booth. You all remember that? And I opened the phone book, and I looked for McLean. He was from India, but he had an Irish name. And if you've got an Irish name in New York City, you're not the only one. And I get to the section, and there are pages and pages of McLeans. And, of course, I'm not looking for his name. I'm looking for his parents' name. I don't know their name, so I just was going to have to dial all the McLeans. And I realized I don't have enough money, and I was so discouraged and tired. I slumped down in this phone booth in New York City. I'm just crouching there, and I just kind of spontaneously pray, oh Lord, what am I going to do? I need help. You know, not even a religious prayer, just kind of just expressing frustration and desperation. And guess who walks by the phone booth? David. As a matter of fact, when I first saw it, I thought, no. Here I am. How many people in New York City? 8 million. I am looking for this guy I haven't seen in a while, and I'm trying to find him, and I'm praying how to find him. I'm looking through the phone book, and he walks by the phone booth. What are the chances? And I began to think, maybe there is a God. These things don't happen by accident. There's also a lot of evidence that we see through history of providential protection. God's providential protection. Providential provision. I read that wrong. The way he provides for our needs. Lots of evidence for God's providential provision. How many of you remember when Jesus was required to pay a temple tax and he didn't have the money? Peter said, oh yeah, he pays all his taxes. And Matthew 17:27, Jesus told Peter, well, here's what you need to do so we can get this money. I want you to go to the Lake Gennesaret, Sea of Galilee, and cast in a hook and take up the first fish that you catch. And when you open his mouth, you'll find a piece of money in the fish's mouth. It'll be just the right amount of money. Use that to pay for the temple tax. Now, some people read stories like this in the Bible and think, what fanciful legends. Well, they ought to remember what happened in 2008 to Joe Richardson of Boone, Texas. He got a phone call from 3 soldiers that were fishing. These soldiers had the weekend off, and they caught an 8-pound bass. That 8-pound bass, when they brought it up on the deck of their fishing boat at Sam Rayburn Lake near Boone, Texas, bounced around on the deck for a minute, and a gold ring popped out of his mouth. They were a little surprised by that. Well, it was a little bit mucky, as you'd expect, having been at the bottom of a lake and inside a fish. And they took some insect repellent and WD-40. I don't know why they picked that chemical combination. That's just what they had in their tackle box. And they scrubbed it off and they cleaned it, and it was a class graduating ring, and it had a name inscribed on the inside they could still read. Joe Richardson. So one of them had an iPhone out there on the lake. Right there, he searched in the area to see if there happened to be any Joe Richardsons living in the area with that name. They found 3. Second or third one they called, they said, we found this ring, a graduation ring from 88, 20 years earlier, from the Institute of Technology Research that you graduated from. And Joe thought it was a prankster, one of his friends playing a prank on it. They said, well, we found it in a fish. They finally met the soldiers in disbelief at a Dairy Queen, which would be appropriate in Texas. And it was his class ring that he had lost fishing 20 years earlier that had been sitting in the muck at the bottom of the lake, that or had passed through a lot of different fish during that time. What are the chances that you would ever hope to have your class ring recovered from the bottom of a lake because a fish swallowed it and it finds its way back to you? Does that kind of thing happen can you believe that story in the Bible? Now, I brought a couple illustrations in. Let me just tell you one thing that spawned this sermon. Bear with me for just a moment. I'll be back. A couple of odd things I want to show you here, just as illustrations. I'll do this one. This is the older one. This is a GPS that I take with me. It's not a new one. I bought this a few years ago. I travel a lot, rental cars. I get lost in cities. So I take this GPS, and I plug it in, and you can program it. They're really, really neat. And what I do is, since nobody ever uses a tachometer in the car, it comes with this handy-dandy suction cup. And you take the suction cup, and it's got a little clamp, and you lick it to sterilize it. And then you put it up over the tachometer, and then you lock the thing down, then you snap that thing on, and it's usually out of the shade. It's great, and I have a built-in GPS. Whenever I drive, I go to my destinations, and it's saved me so many times. I use it all the time when I travel because I have a tendency to get lost. I've got a terrible sense of direction. You can ask Karen. Not too long ago, I was on a trip, and in the haste to get from my rental car to a plane for which I was late, I pulling all my stuff together, I got my GPS, and I got my sunglasses, and I got my laptop, and I got out, and the guy comes over and gives me my receipt, and I get into the airport, and I go through the security, and all of a sudden I thought, I forgot the suction cup for my GPS. I will never get it back. Those people that work at the rental agencies, I'm sure they're nice, but people are leaving stuff all the time, and they don't have time to search out all these customers and get them their sunglasses back. I thought, that's it. I was depressed because that's my buddy. I use it all the time. And now I'm going to have to hold it in my lap, or it's going to be sliding back and forth across the dash, and I don't know what to do. That same week, I'm in staff meeting at our office right over here, and the pastors were visiting with each other, and Pastor John Quitzevite of the Granite Bay Church, he says, you know, the strangest thing happened this week. I went to a thrift store, and I bought an empty piece of luggage. I bought a piece of luggage that they were selling in the thrift store. I got it home, I opened it up, I was cleaning out the pockets that are in it, and then he said, there was a GPS in there. I said, really? He said, yeah. He said, it had the suction cup and all this stuff, and I said, really? I said, well, you know, I just lost my suction cup. And, you know, I don't know if they sell these things separately, but I hadn't even checked yet. And I said, do you know what brand it is? Because, you know, they got TomTom, they got Magellan, they got all kinds of different brands of GPSs. And he said, well, I don't remember. He said, but I won't need it because I always use my phone for my GPS. I haven't upgraded to that yet. And I said, well, would you mind me looking at it? He said, sure. So he gives it to me when we meet up at Weimar the next day. And it fits. I've already tested it. I went out on the road, and what are the chances? I said, Lord, I lost my suction cup. And that week, one of our associate pastors buys a piece of luggage where someone left the GPS with my suction cup in it, that I need anyway. What are the chances? That's, to me, a providential provision. I get so excited about those things. You know, they just remind us that God is real. Now, do you know what this is? Some of you know what this is. This is a pressurized can for racquetballs. And what it does is it not only keeps your racquetballs fresh, because no one likes eating a stale racquetball, but it makes them bounce better, keeps them under pressure, and it helps them bounce. It's got a little rubber O-ring here that, I don't know if you can see that. I don't know if I can even take it off. It's in there pretty good because it's a snug, I can't take it off. It's a snug fit. 2 weeks ago, after having this for 10 years, they cost like $11 or $14, I don't know. I went to take the lid off, and my O-ring finally wore out, and it broke. It dried out. And I'm kind of moaning to the partner I was playing with that day. I said, oh, man, I've had this thing so long. I thought I said, you know, I don't know where I'm going to get an O-ring that'll fit this. I'm probably going to have to go buy another can. He said, well, you know, I do pool service, and I got a few O-rings in my truck because I do some pump repair. I said, let's bring it out there and take a look. What are the chances? Now, if you don't think that's strange, how many of you men have an O-ring this size in your car right now? Just plumber. That play racquetball. Well, that's a little thing. It's just an O-ring. But for me, I think, thank you, Lord. That saved me $14. And he gave me the O-ring for free. Now, this kind of stuff happens all the time. I was telling Karen this morning about the message, and I'm almost sure I ought to do a scientific study. But I've got a theory: you get more green lights on your way to church than on your way home. It seems like the Lord just parts the sea. Aren't you glad when you kind of come up to the light and it goes from red to green and nobody stopped in front of you and you don't have to waste gas by stopping and starting? Yeah, I'm the only one that feels that way. That's so nice and you just, and it's almost like I've seen it so many times on my way to church. It's like the angels are flicking the lights for me on my way there. And I always seem to get here on time, no matter when I leave. It's kind of like the children of Israel. When they went out to gather manna, it says it doesn't matter who gathered much or who gathered little, they all had plenty. Sometimes I leave and it's like 10 minutes until church starts. I think, oh no, I'm late. And all the lights change. And there's no police anywhere. And that's just a factor I just mentioned. I don't know why I said that. But God does these things. He provides miraculously. The book Judges, chapter 15, verse 18. God provides providentially. Samson fights this Philistine army. We all know the story where 10,000 or thousands of soldiers are killed with the jawbone of a donkey. And after he gets this great battle, that's a lot of work. He really had to fight. God gave him victory, but he had to fight. And he was tired, and he was thirsty. He'd been a prisoner, and here he finally collapses at the end of the battle. And he says, Lord, you've given this great deliverance into the hand of your servant. And now shall I die from thirst and fall into the hand of my enemies? Here I beat them, but I'm so thirsty I can't walk. But God clave an open place in that valley. The valley is also called the jawbone of a donkey. The valley was named after the battle, but he clave a hollow place right there, and water came out. And he drank, and his spirit came again, and he revived. Therefore, the name of the place is called Fountain of the Praying One, which is in Lehi to this day. In other words, that fountain continued to run to this very day, at least when it was recorded, because Samson prayed and God opened water in the ground. Another fable from the Bible, some will say. Another one of those fairy tales that you would find in the Bible. I've shared this before. I don't remember if I did it in church here or if it was at one of our revival meetings. Have you heard about the miracle of Andersonville? Andersonville, better known as Fort Sumter, was the most infamous Confederate prison of war camp where they held Northern troops. And in an area that was designed to hold about 8,000 or 10,000 people, they had up to 30,000 soldiers. And then, of course, towards the tail end of the war, because the Confederate soldiers were starving, the prisoners of the Confederate soldiers were really starving. And Fort Sumter was a very, very bad place. 16,000 Union soldiers died in the POW camp from malaria, starvation, malnourishment, heat. They were out there in the open, sometimes crowded so closely together they were back to back. They scarcely had a place to lay down. No shelter from the cold in the winter. No shade from the sweltering Atlanta. 100 degrees in that humidity in the summertime out there in the open sun. And what made matters really bad, the only water provided to the prisoners, the only water, came from a feeble creek that before it ran right under the fence into Fort Sumter, it ran through the guard residence and the barn of the guard animals and horses into then the prisoners' camp, and that was the only water provided. It was virtual sewage, which is why so many of them died. Near the end of the war, one August summer in particular, the men, it had just become unbearable. It was 100 degrees. They're out there, and they decided to have a prayer meeting and to pray for a couple things. One, to pray for rain, cloudless, blazing sky, to pray for rain to not only cool them, to give them some shade, to wash their filthy bodies, and give them some clean water to drink. They all began to pray, and some of the guards thought this was crazy. But out of nowhere, clouds began to form. A tremendous thunderhead developed directly over them, and it began to rain, and it began to pour. And it was what they call in the backcountry a gully washer. You know what a gully washer is? It's when it rains so hard that it washes out the gullies. And rinsed the camp. Towards the end of the storm, lightning began to flash. One bolt of lightning struck right in the middle of the camp. Amazingly, did not hit any prisoners of war. And when the storm was over and the The wet ground began to dry up. A spring of water was running where the lightning struck that is still running to this day. They call it Providence Spring. What are the chances? You can go there today. They got the sign. The whole story is right there in history. What are the chances? Does God still work miracles of provision today? I believe He does. Then there's the stories that you read in the Bible of God's providential timing. Just the timing was so unique. I remember reading in 2 Kings. You might want to turn to this. It's one of those little background stories that a lot of people miss. 2 Kings chapter 8, verse 1. Now, before we read it, I want you to go to that spot. Do you remember the story where Elisha, not Elijah, Elijah and Elisha both resurrected boys that had died? Elisha resurrected the boy of the Shunammite woman that made him the little guest house on top of her house. You remember that story? And Gehazi, Elisha's servant, he tried to resurrect the boy, but he couldn't. Finally, Elisha came, and he prayed over the boy, and he was raised. 2 Kings 8, verse 1. Then Elisha spoke to the woman whose son he had restored to life, saying, "Arise and go, you and your household, and stay wherever you can, for the Lord has called a famine. Furthermore, it will come upon the land for 7 years." So the woman arose and did according to the saying of the man of God. Sometimes areas were smitten with famine, and you'd have to just stay somewhere else. You remember the story of Ruth. Naomi and her husband had left Bethlehem for Moab because there was a famine in Bethlehem and there was no food. They depended on the rain to water the crops. That's how the Israelites ended up in Egypt. They moved because of a famine. Elisha cared about this woman. God providentially providing for her said, telling you in advance there's going to be a 7-year famine like there was in Egypt. You need to go and stay somewhere else. And she did. And the Lord took care of her while she was gone. But after the famine was over, she came back and someone had occupied her land and taken it. And, that could happen if you've gone that long. And she lost everything. She dwelt in the land of the Philistines 7 years. It came to pass at the end of 7 years, the woman returned from the land of Philistines, and she went to make an appeal to the king of Israel for her house and her land. Now, just before she goes to the king is the Supreme Court judge. He's your final place where you can appeal for some justice. Normally, the king of Israel would have said to a stranger, "You left, an Israelite has taken your land, tough cookies. You are a Shunammite." Wasn't one of their people. But it just so happened providentially that while the king is hearing these different cases, in between cases, Gehazi, the apprentice servant for Elisha the prophet, the king is asking him, "Tell me about all the miracles of Elisha." And he starts telling the king about the miracle. Wait, it's in the Bible. Let me read it here right out of the Bible. So the king talked with Gehazi, the servant of the man of God, saying, "Tell me, please, all the great things Elisha has done." Now it happened as he was telling the king how Elisha had restored the dead to life, that there was the woman whose son he had restored to life, and the woman appealing to the king for her house and her land. And Gehazi said, "My lord, O king, this is the woman, and this is her son who Elisha restored to life." And when the king asked the woman, she told him. So the king appointed a certain officer and said, "Restore everything that was hers, and all the proceeds of the field on her property from the day she left until today." What are the chances? Right at that moment, when Gehazi was telling the king about the miracles of Elisha, and he said, "Yeah, and he raised this boy to life," and that's a pretty far-fetched story. He said, "And there she is, and there's the boy." And she confirms the story. I got one for you. 25 years ago, I got a call from Max Mace with the Heritage Singers, and he invited me to travel with a group. So I did that off and on for a year and a half. Great experience. It was actually very important to me. First time I'd really done much public speaking. I didn't sing much with the group. I did mostly sharing testimony, making altar calls and things. But my father at that time owned an airline called Capital Airlines. And they flew through the Caribbean, Europe, and different things, and the Heritage Singers were traveling to some of these places. And I said to Max, I said, maybe if we would advertise on the TV program, Heritage Singers were doing a little TV program on Trinity Broadcasting back then. I said, maybe if we'd mention Capital Air or something, you guys could fly for free. Oh, they said, oh, that'd be great. You know how much that would save us? So I was visiting my dad in Florida. And you just got to know, my dad was a gruff guy. He was not very approachable. And I thought, boy, how do I ask for this? And I was terrified. Now, through the weekend, I'm praying, oh, Lord, I don't know how to bring this up. I don't want him to tell me no. You can only handle so much rejection. And so, I'm wondering how to do it. And then I'm trying to muster the courage. I've got one more day, and I'm leaving. I'm going back. And I was afraid I was going to have to say, Max. He's going to say, did you ask him? I said, no, I chickened out. I didn't ask him. And I'm sitting in the living room, just me and my dad, trying to figure out, Lord, how do I get the courage to ask him? And my dad is drinking a martini, and he's flipping through the TV channels. And all of a sudden, he flips the channel, and he stops, and there's the Heritage Singers singing on TV. And I said, hey, Dad, stop right there. He said, what? I said, see that group? Yeah. I said, that's the group I'm traveling with now. Really? And he sits up. He says, they're on TV. They really are. Yeah. I said, and they'll advertise for you all over the country. If you could give them empty seats when they travel. He said, sure, we can do that. Now, what are the chances that I'm right there praying, I don't know how to say this, my dad puts them on TV at that moment? That's one of 1,000 things that have happened through time. The Lord's done these things for you, too. Providential timing. You ever had one of those providential impressions where you just got this strong impression out of the blue and you're wondering why that came to you when it came to you? You can read about this in the book of Acts. Acts chapter 8, verse 29 and 30. Spirit spoke to Philip and impressed him to go near this Ethiopian treasurer who's riding along in the chariot. He said, go near that chariot. Probably a lot of chariots going around the road. He said, join yourself to him. And Philip ran up to him, and he heard that he's reading out loud from the prophet Isaiah. And he said, you know what you're reading? Well, you all know the story. He ends up giving that man a Bible study, and he baptizes him. And then, after he comes out of the water baptizing him, first time in the Bible, somebody's actually beamed from one place to another on earth. Now, Elijah was beamed up. Philip was beamed horizontally from one place to another. And people say, oh, another one of them stories. But have you ever noticed sometimes God gives you an impression and you think, why would I get this strange impression to do this thing that doesn't make any sense at all? And it's only looking back you say, that was the Lord. That was God's providence impressing me. I have a lot of stories I could tell you, but one that comes to me in particular, I was doing meetings in Paradise, California. Now, I can't tell your stories. I can only tell mine. Matter of fact, I was sitting with the pastors the other day talking about the sermon. I said, tell me some of your providential stories. And we've all got them, don't we? These are miracles. Doing meetings with Pastor Lonnie Melashenko up in Paradise 20 years ago. And it's springtime, and there is snow still on Mendocino Pass. I flew over to Covelo this last week, and there's still snow up there. You can't get across. But and when I went home between the meetings, we had a few nights off. I needed to go back to home. I would drive all the way down from Paradise down to Highway 20, drive across by Lakeport, back up Highway 101, back in 162 to Covelo. It's a long way. And I got this strange impression. Go across the mountain. And I thought, that's crazy. There's still snow on the pass. I'll never make it. Go across the mountain. And I couldn't fight this impression. I thought, why would I do that? I know that it's too early in the year. The pass will be closed. There have been times that I was the first one to cross after a winter, that pass, and I got stuck at the top. I got pictures of it. I'll show you sometime. And I couldn't shake this impression I was supposed to go up there. Now, this is some of the most remote country in Northern California. Some of you heard about one of the owners and operators of CNET company got lost with his wife on some of these mountains back there, and he died of exposure. And so it is way out there, wild, remote country. And from the time you leave Highway 5 until you get to Covelo, you won't see another car many times. Bill, you know what I'm talking about. That road, some of you have driven that. And so I take off, and it's night. I've finished an evangelistic meeting. And so it's 9:30 before I even leave, and it's a 3.5-hour drive. And I'm driving up in the hills, and all of a sudden I see there's snow on the sides of the road, and I think, no way will the pass be open. So I ought to just turn around now because I've got to backtrack all the way. But I kept thinking, you got to keep going. So I keep going. I'm driving up the road. And around every bend, pretty soon I'm in snow. And I haven't even gotten to where the deep drifts are. And I'm thinking, turn around. But when I get to the snow on the road, there's tracks. And I think, well, maybe someone made it across. And so I keep following the tracks, and I follow the tracks, and it gets deeper and deeper. And I come upon a little two-wheel drive Toyota pickup truck with a camper shell that is stuck. The guy, it was actually someone from Germany who somehow had a car from his college friend that was looking at a map about the quickest way to Covelo and didn't realize what he was going to run into. And he had been stuck there for 2 days. And he tried to turn the car around in the snow. It was only two-wheel drive. He got stuck on the side of the road, and he had tried everything under the sun to get out, and he was an atheist. But he had resorted to prayer. And so I'm there with my four-wheel drive Nissan, still have that truck today, by the way, 25 years later, and my winch on the front, and I pull him out. And I don't know whether to be happy or not, because I say, I know the Lord sent me to pull you out. I'm a little mad that you got stuck because he impressed me to come up here and pull you out. Now I got to drive all the way back around again. I knew I wasn't going to get across, but I said, the Lord impressed me to come up here, obviously for you, because beyond him, the road was completely closed with drifts. And it was only after going up there I realized this is why I was supposed to do that. But I was rejoicing. I was able to talk to the guy about the Lord, and I think I gave him some literature, and he made me go all that way for one German tourist that got mixed up. Does the Lord care about us? He puts us in the right place at the right time. What are the chances that those things would be an accident? Well, can I tell you one more little story? It's a little disconnected from this one. I remember I went, in my many business travels, I went back to, I think it was Chicago. And when you travel, a cell phone is very important because you're on business trips, staying in touch with the family. And you ever try and pay for a hotel phone, what they charge? You call from the hotel phone. So I get to Chicago, and I get to the room, and I think, oh, I'm unpacking. I want to plug in my phone and charge it. I forgot my charger. My phone is on one little bar. It's not going to make it through the night. And I'm thinking, oh, Lord, I've got, 5 days here, whatever it is, and I'm never going to make it. I don't know what to do. And it's at night, and I was going to call in, and I'm just praying about it and thinking, where am I going to find a charger? Well, as I finished unpacking, I looked, and in the outlet next to my bed, I saw what looked like a phone charger. It's got the little adapter thing on it. And I thought, could it be? You know how many different phone brands there are out there? And all the little charger plugins are different. You don't know if you got a Nokia, you got a Sanyo, you got all these different brands, and then none of them fit. And I think, Lord, could it be? And so I pulled that thing out. It's a Motorola, just like mine. It fit perfectly. So I used it for the weekend. I hope whoever left it there understands, and then I turned it in to the front desk. I didn't want to take it with me. That wouldn't have been right, and I got mine at home. But little things like that, and I think, I've never gone into a hotel room before and seen someone's charger left behind. The only time I see someone leave their charger left behind, I'm sure it happens all the time, but the only time I saw one left behind was when I had left mine behind. And it happened to be my same phone. Is there a God? These little things, they happen all the time. And for me, it's just further evidence of the providence of the Lord. There's things that are happening behind the scenes all the time that we don't recognize. God is working miracles, His wonders to perform. Good and bad. Providentially, it's a miracle of God you made it to church today. I mean, there are armies of demons out there that would love to destroy every one of us. And God is protecting us. 1 Peter 5:8, be sober and be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, is going around seeking whom he might devour. You can maybe read in the book of Esther. It tells us about one night the king could not sleep. We talked about Esther a moment. King of Persia couldn't sleep. He commanded the books to be brought and the chronicles to be read. And it was found written that Mordecai had told Bigtha and Tirzah, two of the king's chamberlains, that there was an assassination attempt on the king. And the king says to his scribe, he just can't sleep, and just out of the blue, who knows, Esther was his wife, she might have said, well, have him read the chronicles to you, that'll put you back to sleep. And he starts reading to him. And the king says, did we do anything for this guy Mordecai that saved me from this assassination attempt? And he looks through the footnotes. He says, no, there's nothing recorded. And the king is thinking to himself, I wonder what I'll do for this guy. I need to reward him. It's not very kingly of me not to thank someone that saves my life. While he's thinking that, it says Haman comes in to ask permission. He's asking for permission to execute Mordecai and hang him on the gallows. He's just finished constructing. But before Haman can speak, the king says, I know you're here for something, but I got a question first. I need to ask you, what shall I do to honor somebody? Haman thinks, well, who do you want to honor more than me? You all know this story. Turns out it's all going to happen to Mordecai. And Haman is forced to march Mordecai up and down the street with all this fanfare. What amazing providence. You know, one pastor said, many of Jesus' most incredible teachings are the result of somebody interrupting him. Have you ever been annoyed at an interruption? I have. Come on. And Jesus looked at these interruptions as opportunities to teach about God. Maybe we ought to look at the interruptions that happen in our lives as God's providential opportunities to learn something. Say, Lord, how do you want to grow me? Or how can I help somebody through this interruption? Then you've got, of course, the many stories of providential placement. Providential placement. You know, there's a verse in the Bible, you find it 4 times. I think all 4 are in Psalm 107. It says, oh, that men would praise the Lord for his goodness and for his wonderful works to the children of men. We ought to praise him for his wonderful works. He's doing things for us providentially all the time. You know, there's one more story I'd like to read you that actually is appropriate considering that this is the Memorial Weekend. And there's a picture on the screen that I want you to go back to that will actually factor into this story. It's of a kind of a decrepit, you might have wondered what it was. It's a decrepit life belt from World War II. On a hot August night in 1942, the U.S. and Japanese were preparing to engage in the deadly naval battle of Savo for possession of Guadalcanal. Young Elgin Staples, a signalman 3rd class on the USS Astoria, was awakened from an exhausted sleep by a loud explosion. Jumping to his feet with his heart pounding, he grabbed his life belt, strapped it on. Staples survived the first hail of enemy shells and was tending to the wounded when a gun turret exploded and he was blown overboard, plummeting 30 feet through the night into the dark, shark-infested waters. Wounded in his leg and his shoulder by shrapnel, he was kept afloat by his narrow life belt that he managed to activate. For 4 agonizing hours, he drifted in the open sea as large, dark creatures brushed against his legs. Many of those soldiers were actually killed and eaten by sharks. During the terrifying hours that passed, he thought often about his mother, and he knew she was praying for him. At sunrise, Staples was rescued by a passing destroyer and promptly returned to his floundering ship, the Astoria. The captain of that ship hoped that he could beach it before it sank, but he didn't make it, so he, still clinging to his life belt, now has to jump overboard again, wounded, because it sank. Forced him to leap back into the sea. He's soon picked up again by the USS President Jackson and eventually evacuated to safety. On board the transport ship, Staples closely examined his life belt that had saved him twice. It was manufactured by the Firestone Rubber Company, and it bore a unique registration number. He felt impressed to hang on to that life belt. I would too after all that. I want to let it go. As a souvenir. He was given 30 days leave to go back to the States and recover from his injuries and stay at home. While home, he was telling the story to his mother, who he didn't realize had now taken a job doing wartime work at the Firestone plant in Akron, Ohio. Curious, he grabbed the deflated life belt from his duffel bag and set it on the table in front of her. He said to his mother, told her the whole story, and said, "What's the purpose of the number stamped on this belt?" She replied that the company made many thousands of belts for all the sailors, many, many thousands of belts. And that number was the number of the personal individual that would make and then inspect the belt. She looked at it and she examined the number with her voice hardly above a whisper and her eyes wide and her face pale. She said, "Son, I am an inspector at the Firestone plant, and this is my number. I inspected this belt." The mother had always been praying when she inspected every belt. She said, "You never know. I want to make sure these things work. It might save my son someday." What are the chances? Well, we're out of time, but I'm not out of stories, friends. There's a lot of evidence in the Bible and in life for God's provision for us. We better tie this off. What about you? Have you noticed God's providence in your life? How many times could you track back over the course of your life and say, wow, God provided just in time? Or the right person was in the right place at the right time? Or you just saw circumstances arrange where you were to be with a person who really needed help at that time, and you were the means through which Jesus helped them. And he orchestrated things divinely and providentially so you could be there. How quickly we forget. I was talking with Karen this morning, and I thought, we ought to write these stories down. Because just speaking for myself, I'm only telling you a small fraction. As it says in the book of Hebrews, what shall I more say? For time would fail me to tell you of all the stories I can see in my life of how God has done things miraculously. And first of all, it tells us there is a God. Because what are the chances? These things would never happen by accident. Secondly, it tells us that he's watching over us, that you're never alone, that there is a plan. And then, I wanted to share that scripture right up at the beginning, Romans 8:27 and 28. Now he who searches the hearts and knows what the mind of the Spirit is, because he makes intercession for the saints according to the will of God. And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. If you've been called and you've accepted that call, then you can be confident that he's going to work everything together for good. Anything that happens in your life is an opportunity for you to grow to be more like Jesus, or you to help other people find Jesus. Nothing happens by accident. There is no chance or luck in God's kingdom. He is sovereign, and he sees all. You're not walking alone. You're walking with God all the time, though you forget and you don't see him. Every now and then he gets our attention by intervening providentially somehow in our lives and us saying, wow, what are the chances? Reminding us that he's there. He wants us to remember that he's always there, that you're not alone. And that's why I thought it'd be good to sing My Lord and I as our closing hymn. Number 456, that's easy. 456. Let's stand together, we'll sing that. My Lord and I.
I could not
I'm saving one verse because I want to give you an opportunity to respond. There may be some of you who have been fretting. You forget that God is there. He's never leaving you alone. He's watching over you. Nothing happens in you or in your life or to you that He hasn't first measured and weighed in eternity. And you might be worrying for nothing. He's got 1,000 ways to solve your problems when you can't think of one. And He's working behind the scenes, we often forget, providing for us, protecting us, arranging things, working things out for good. And you've been doing all that worrying all by yourself. God is not wringing His hands. The veins do not stand out in His temples through stress because of what's happening in the world. He is at peace, and He wants us to have that peace. Have you forgotten sometimes that God's on the throne? Maybe you thought you were in charge. Maybe you've never surrendered your life to God. You've forgot about or not thought about all the evidence that He's given us that He's there and that there is a plan for your life. If you'd like to surrender your life to Him, or just renew your commitment and say, Lord, why am I forgetting that You're there? And you'd like to do that publicly or ask for prayer in some way, then as we sing the last verse, My Lord and I, you can walk with the Lord to the front here and in a special way say, Lord, here am I. I want to belong with You. I want to always remember You. As we sing verse 4, if that's your desire, come. We'll pray together. Lord, we have to ask ourselves, what are the chances? It's so obvious when we consider the evidence that the things that we see happening all through history and even in our lives could not happen by coincidence. That You are alive and well, that You are in charge, and that You're governing our lives when we surrender them to You. Help us to remember that all things work together for the good of those that love You. Lord, it's for those that surrender our lives to You that You can orchestrate the providence for good. I pray that that'll be the prayer of each person here. We also want to pray in a special way for those who've come forward this morning, that You'll be very real to them. I pray that You'll bless them with peace and help them to know that You're walking with them all the time, though we sometimes forget. And all of us as a church family, I pray we'll be more conscious and aware, that we'll do things to help remember all the many ways and times You've intervened in our lives to use us, to reach others, to provide for our needs, to protect us, and just simply to bless us. Lord, I pray that we'll have our faith strengthened and remember these truths as we go from this place. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.